Is always why poetry?
Why poetry? That's a good question. That was when you emailed me that, I was thinking about it, and I guess it's for me. It's I guess I never really thought about it that way. I guess poetry kind of grabbed me. I mean, when I was young, I knew I was a writer, but poetry for me is very different. But in a lot of ways, it's just kind of my fiction. When I first started writing when I was young, it always tended toward the poetic and the more abstract. And so as I grew and I started really writing seriously about 10 years ago, it just came out as poetry. And I knew, and then from that point on, I just kind of started doing more and more poetry and less fiction, even though I'm actually swinging back to doing a little bit more fiction now. But poetry's always just been in me. It's always, I guess I got bit by the poetry bug. And
How old were you when you got bit?
That's a good question. I remember when I was maybe 14 or 15, I actually got a poem in one of those, like this American high school student poem that they had back in the day. You get like the volume with it was like 1980, so I don't even know whatever happened to that thing, and I probably hate that poem if I saw it today. But that was really the beginning of it, and from that point on, I've always been, I grew up with a lot of punk rockers. So
Where'd you grow up?
Well, I grew up down in South Texas, and I hung out with a lot of punk rockers, and so I would be writing basically what I thought were lyrics, but they were actually poems at the time. And so that's really where I think it started. There's a lot of that is still in there. I guess also where the beat comes from too.
Cool. So who are some of the early poets that spoke to you?
Some of the early ones, before I really discovered the beats, really. It was kind of strange, but I did like Frost. I still like Robert Frost. I think he's got Whitman. I read Whitman when I was young, and Langston Hughes, and interestingly enough, my uncle was a poet back in the 80s, and when I was like, he had 2 books of poetry before he stopped writing.
Wow.
And I remember that when I was a kid, because I was like maybe 10 or something, and I remember him bringing these 2 boxes full of his books in there, and it was just the first time I'd ever, someone that you could actually publish a book. And so, and in a lot of ways, that's kind of, and he wrote a lot of poems that were about, certain things that happened to basically him when he was young. That was kind of my first real influence into poetry.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
So I got a copy of your first poetry book, The Beat. That is your first?
That's my first.
Okay. And you've called yourself a kind of modern day beat, and you've worked getting the beat festivals going.
Yeah.
And so what is it about the beats? I mean, tell us a little about that.
Well, the beats, what happens was, I didn't really read the beats until I was in college. And I started really late. I took a 1960s history course, and the professor there told me that if you really want to understand the 60s, you got to read the beats. And so there's a guy out here that just started teaching a beat literature course named Rob Johnson. And so I took Rob Johnson's beat course.
And this is where?
University of Texas Pan American.
Okay.
That was a long time ago, maybe, was it 99? So we're looking at 15 years ago. Okay. I just read On the Road, and I read Hal, and it was just like an addiction after that. It just like lit a fire in me. And what I really loved about the beat poetry was the freedom. The freedom in the prose, and also the energy and the exuberance of life. Because before that point, I'd read a lot of existential literature, Camus, Sartre, and Hemingway, and all this. It was all, to me, I really loved it, but it was very depressing. Then I read the beats, and there was this exuberance for life, and also a license to write, in this free kind of open space. And it just, after that point, I just read everything I could. And every single beat book. And then, Rob Johnson is still teaching that beat course. And,
Nice.
he's even done, he was been in all the beat fests.
Yeah, he was at the one in Austin.
Yeah, so, that's really what it was. I just read it. And the same thing happens to a lot of, when I teach Hal and On the Road, it's just like an awakening. Like a switch goes off and they find something. And it's really, that's really, in a lot of ways, that's very addictive. Just to read everything that comes out of there. But,
Do you have a favorite?
my favorite is still Kerouac, but I think his poetry is underrated. I mean, people don't really read as much of his poetry.
Right.
He's got some really good stuff, and his haikus are really top notch. Kerouac's prose, though, has been more influential, but his poetry I've really been getting to. His Mexico City Blues is really good.
Yeah.
That's still, Ferlinghetti's kind of a close
Yeah,
second.
he was Coney Island of the Mind.
Coney Island of the Mind, yes.
Entry Drug.
Yes, all those. Those are really good. So, yeah.
Okay. You want to tell us a little bit about the Beat Fest? So, how many have there been?
4, I believe.
4.
I think we're on the 4th.
Six.
First one was in Bryan, College Station. Right. Second one was in Austin. Third one was in Edinburgh. And then the fourth one's Dallas.
Okay, and they skipped this year.
Well, it hasn't been skipped as much as postponed because we're trying to coincide with the release of the actual Beat anthology. And so that's what we're working toward. And so there was just a lot of things that happened when we were talking with the people in Dallas, and I just kind of said, you know what, why don't we just wait for that and kind of make that the big event, because it's going to be coming out within a few months. But that started really, was it back in when did we start that? 2011, I believe. And it started, the reason it started is because A&M, when I was at Texas A&M in College Station, really like to bring in authors and pay them like tons of money, about one person. And so I was sitting there with Chuck Taylor, and they were saying, we could use all that money and pay like lots of people, like 30 poets to have a festival. That's kind of where it started. And so that's what we did. We said, well, let's just do a beat festival and do it completely free and just invite, 30 poets, and that's how it started. And we had 35 poets in College Station of all places. And then Austin kind of grew from there, and then, we kept keeping going, but kind of collecting. There's a whole bunch of people that kind of came out of the woodwork for those festivals, and I think a lot of it has been tied to this anthology that we put together. But there's been an energy behind that I don't think we've seen in a while.
Okay, so tell us about the anthology. It's UT Press, right?
It's the Lamar University.
Oh, okay.
Yes. We were originally with UT, but UT is UT. Well, actually, Jerry Craven really wanted it from Lamar University Press, and there was more license that we were able to have with Lamar University Press with the way we were designing the book. Mm-hmm. So we went with Lamar.
How big is the book? What's it going to look like?
That's a good question. Right now, I think it's about 350, 400 pages. It's a pretty big book. We collected over 70 years worth of writing from the 1940s with Kerouac, Burroughs, Ginsberg. We have unpublished stories by Ginsberg that's going into this. Unpublished poems by Ginsberg himself, wrote with Karen Minzer from Dallas. So we collected a lot of stuff, and it took us a while because it's an extensive 70 years of writings, a lot to encompass, all the way down to people who are writing. You're in that book.
Yeah.
And Joe's in that book.
Yeah.
I think, Ken, are you in that?
No.
Okay. Now remember, we have a lot of people in there, but we try to connect to all these different writers, people that are influenced, people that are kind of keeping the whole tradition alive, and we've kind of encompassed 70 years worth of writings into this anthology.
And what's the title?
It's called The Beat Estate in the Union. And the title actually comes from a letter from Joan Bulmer, who was,
Neil's second wife?
No, Joe Vollmer was William Burroughs'
Oh, okay.
the one he shot in Mexico.
Right.
Yeah, he wrote a letter to Allen Ginsberg when Burroughs and her were living in East Texas, of all places. And she was trying to get Ginsberg to come down to Texas, and she wrote, come to Texas, the beatest state in the Union. So that's where we stole the title from.
Yeah, they had a farm out near Brenham, I guess.
I don't know, it was way out there. Rob Johnson's been out there, so it's like it's kind of crazy. But yeah, they were growing, I think, weed and pot.
Yeah, they were they wanted to have a cannabis farm, but nobody had the wherewithal to work all the angles or
They just didn't know what
do the work.
They were writers trying to be farmers, and they didn't do it.
All right. So Chris is also a poetry instructor and creative writing instructor, and you've got a grad level workshop this semester.
Yes,
in poetry. So will you share some wisdom that you tell your poets?
How do I tell them? A lot of there's a great poem by Billy Collins called "Introduction to Poetry." If you ever read that, it's a very short poem, but it's about. He talks about his students and when he's teaching creative writing, and he says one of the biggest I don't have it memorized, but one of the biggest problems the students have is that they when they take a poem, they tie it to a chair and try to beat meaning out of it.
Right. Okay. Yes.
And that is one of the toughest things. We have getting writers to speak through images instead of rants. It's about it's a lot about concrete image. You can do a lot with an image. Joe's very good at imagery, and his poems are really good compass that. But that's the toughest thing for a writer to do. And I think a lot of that might be the influence of type of ranting spoken word. But even that, if done right, has a lot of concrete, very good use of imagery in it. But that's the toughest one.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, that's what I tell my students as well. I'm going to get out of the way, and why don't you read poetry for about maybe 15, 20 minutes?
Sure.